Beyond, who is a Sikh.
Yeah.
Yes. What does Beyond mean?
It means boundless,
Boundless.
unlimited, infinite. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. That's interesting. In Islam, we don't usually believe in giving attributes of God to our name. So like, I would not call myself like, I don't know, the most merciful, or stuff like that. But anyway, that's a different topic. So Beyond, so you had some questions about Islam. So he's watching some of our videos.
Yeah.
You had some questions. How old are you?
I'm 21.
21. You're a handsome guy, you know. You're gonna cause. That's why we need to blur your face, because otherwise the girls are gonna get a bit excited. Yes. So tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm a Sikh. A Sikh is how you're supposed to say it. But I just come across your videos. I've watched them a few times.
Yeah.
And one of my main questions is why Muslims, and I don't want to say this in a way that's disrespectful.
No, bro.
I've got a lot of Islamic friends, but why Muhammad, peace be upon him, had
you know what, man? The fact that you even say peace be upon him, I really appreciate it, because it shows what kind of a person you are.
Had wives who were below age.
Yes.
And I've heard the justifications that he waited a few years to consummate the marriage.
Yes.
And so he had wives who were
young, Aisha.
Young, Aisha.
Yeah. That was his only wife that was the youngest.
Yeah. And the justification that he says is for the times, but if Muhammad is someone you would idolize, and every Muslim would want to walk in their footsteps if they could, how can then the Prophet be for all times if he...
Something specific at that time?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a good question. So the way we argue that is the following. We believe that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was the best role model for all times, not just for that time. Now, how do we put that together, reconcile that with him marrying Aisha at 6 and consummating the marriage at 9? So if that's the case, the question you're asking is very valid. Ali, if that's the case, if that was for that time, then surely you should be able to follow that method in today's time. And if you're not, then that means that your Prophet did what was good only for that time. So let me tell you how we reconcile. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, married Aisha at 6. Marriage to us doesn't mean consummation. So in today's time, you have people who have... If there's any kids, please don't watch this. Turn it off. People these days have sex and then they get married. So it's the opposite way now. So they do everything they do in a marriage, and then I don't even know why they get married. Like, hey, let's get married. You've done everything. What are you going to look forward to? So, marriage is boring. Well, of course it's going to be boring because you've done everything before marriage. So in Islam, it's a bit reverse. So marriage doesn't necessarily mean consummation. So it can be an agreement like betrothed. So when we look at William Blackstone's book, The British Common Law, this country 100 years ago, the legal age to get married or betrothed was 7 years old in this country. So now, coming back to your question, the Prophet done a marriage contract at the age of 6, and he waited for her to become an adult at the age of 9. Now, that's when she became an adult. He would have waited longer if she was to mature at the age of 10. If it was 11, it was 12. If he waited 3 years, he would have waited 6 years. Now, how do we reconcile that with today's time? Let me tell you how. If I have a son who is 17 years old and he fell in love with a Muslim girl who is 14 years old, now we apply the same thing the Prophet did in today's time. How? Because he's 16. The age, sometimes the scholars say you have to follow the law of the land, which is that the legal age is 16. Even though we have the issue of teenage pregnancies, where girls are having intimacy and becoming pregnant at the age of 11, 12, 13, 14. So I would say to my son, what do we learn from the prophetic tradition? That you can have a contract, which means it's a marriage, but the consummation can only happen when she reaches the age of 16.
You don't think that somebody of such a young age, even though you say Prophet waited for 3 years, no matter how mature they are, I think a 9-year-old almost, I would say, blanketly wouldn't have the cognitive ability to consent, because 9's very young.
When we say 9 years old, what comes to your mind? Because there has to be a vision in your head.
Child.
Exactly. That's the problem here. So this whole concept of teenager and this concept, it started with the Industrial Revolution. Okay? So the thing is that when we think of a 9-year-old, the first thing that we think about is our nephews or nieces. And we're looking at them and thinking, 9 years old. That's a false comparison. Because what you're doing is you are looking at a 9-year-old today compared to 1400 years ago.
Even then, just in terms of the brain's development,
it's two different paradigms.
The human brain develops how it develops, no matter the time period. Of course, there's people with more intelligence than others, but the brain at that age is more susceptible to be manipulated. And I don't want to say these claims against the Prophet, but at that age you're more vulnerable. Even in this country, you don't want to put criminal responsibility at age because that comes with factors, and people lack capacity at a certain age. And I think that's quite problematic at that point, especially a 9-year-old. But if we were talking more 15, 16, I think that's got more merits, perhaps. And even
how?
I think just the way the brain is at 16-year-old, 17-year-old, they're a bit more intelligent. And the secondary point to the first point to me is that the Prophet was a lot older. I believe they were 50 years old, and 50, that again kind of doesn't sit right with me when
Why doesn't it sit right with you? Because we need to understand where
there's such an age gap between. Query why somebody of that age, even now, when we the girls, we query, we feel why are they doing that? It doesn't quite make sense.
You know what you're doing? You have these images in your mind that you can only refer back to. So in your mind, 54-year-old is you're looking at. Like yesterday, I was watching a documentary, Jimmy Savile. The British Horror Story. When we think about this, all we're doing is the closest thing that we can relate it back to is a 54-year-old, excuse my language, who is a perverted man, who is after little girls and is conniving and tricky. And what we do is we apply that, and then we say, okay, let's envision this is the 54-year-old in my head. Now let me envision the 9-year-old in my head, and then we look at a innocent girl, which all of them are 9-year-old, and then we're like, whoa. That is the problem, because what we're doing once again is that we are misapplying the things that are in our head. That, for example, pedophilia that's happening, and we're saying that has to be that, and we're saying that's false, because what you're doing is, number one, misapplying things you know to your head. There is a lot of pedophiles in our time. So what's happened is we unintentionally, you're not doing this intentionally, unintentionally, subconsciously, we are conditioned to think like that. So what we're saying is the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, we have to look at his life in a whole holistic context. At the age of 25, if he was a man who was a womanizer, and at the time in Arabia, you can marry many women as you like. I mean, not even just marry, you can just have them. He was 25 years old and he married his first wife, which was Khadija, and she was 40. As a 25-year-old man, would you marry a 40-year-old, or would you go for someone 25?
Of course not.
Okay, now, if you wouldn't go for a 40-year-old, or if you did go for a 40-year-old, does that show that you're a womanizer?
I'm not sure. I think with the context around it, with the Prophet's other wives, I understand that point, but
some of them were 70 years old.
Again, then why? Then I would query why the Prophet went for married Aisha at such a young age. But it still remains the point that did happen. Do you understand?
No, that happened. We don't deny it. We accept it. What we're saying is we need to look at context, because what I'm saying is the context here is that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, done something which was abnormal, and we're saying it wasn't abnormal at all, because this contention of him marrying Aisha at 6 is a new phenomenon that happened 100 years ago by Orientalists. Nobody in history for 1300 years ever brought this contention and say, well, hold on a second, what kind of a prophet is this? So this is a new phenomenon. Number one.
Just because something's a new phenomenon.
Yes.
It's because we've developed as a human race.
Really? Do you think we're morally better, in a better position now?
Yeah,
not at all.
In most ways. If you look at like the past times, now I know people like to talk about Trump, things like this, but we're in a better place than we were. Racism, things like this.
Not at all.
It's gone down.
Not at all.
Overall.
Not at all.
I think we are.
I have to disagree, bro. We are in a worse position. We have promiscuity, gambling, murder, alcoholics, drug addicts, suicide. No, bro. The suicide rate, they don't tell you. The suicide rates are on a pandemic. People talking about the virus.
Yeah.
Suicide rates, unhappiness, depression, anxiety. Bro, we are in a far worse place. The only reason we think we're in a better place is because we're monetarily and materialistically better. And we think we measure success and happiness based on that. And if I'm not mistaken, there are some
the rights of women,
the rights of women have worsened. You know why? Because when we talk about the rights of women, we think about an egalitarian system where they are both equal. We believe that that is the biggest injustice done to men. Like if you look at Jordan Peterson, he said when they look at studies and you look at countries that are egalitarian, there is a bigger distance between men and women. So even though they want it to be equal, the distance is greater. The point I'm saying is
kind of separate. But that, for example, women have the right to vote.
that Islam gave that to them 1400 years ago. The right who you want to marry, the right to not adapt your husband's surname, the right to own property, the right to war, the right to fight, the right to divorce. All these things were given to the Muslim woman 1400 years ago, where the Western woman. No, I know, but the Western woman.
Grown to a certain direction.
But what I'm saying is, the Western woman had to fight for those rights with the feminist movements, the first wave, the second wave, the third wave, the fourth wave, fifth wave, Muhammad Hijab's book. The point is this, bro, just because we think we're in a better place doesn't mean we are. We need to measure it based on happiness, not based on what we own. There are many people I know that have Rolls Royces, Rolex watches, and they are the most unhappiest people ever. So the point I'm saying is, going back to the Prophet Muhammad, we need to analyze his character, because his character is what speaks. So
would you do this to somebody today? Do you understand?
Do what to today?
For example, if we had a gentleman that did the same relationships-wise, like you say, 25, married 50, then when they turned 50, they married somebody who was 7, consummated the marriage at 9. Would you then advocate for society and the wider courts, whatever it would be, to do the same approach? Say, look at the character, look at.
But that's not from the prophetic sunnah. Let me tell you what the prophetic sunnah is. If a 50-year-old man, I think this happened actually, a 50-plus-year-old man, he started going out with a girl, I think she's 16. Do you think that's okay?
I think legally it might be, but
morally. Why not? No, one second, why not? One is an adult and another one's an adult.
No, I think it's abuse of power there, right?
So one second,
there's an imbalance of, and this is what speaks to the problem with paedophilia, right?
Yeah.
Somebody who's more intelligent, more wealthy, more powerful.
Yeah.
And there's another human being who doesn't even have the capacity to understand.
A 16-year-old? Then why did they give the age limit to 16 if that's the case? Why did they make it 20?
This is a good point, and there's good arguments to heightening the age because of the fact that kids.
But the fact that they did 16, well, how can I have a problem, or you have a problem, or anybody for that matter have a problem with a 50 or 60-year-old man wanting to have a relationship with a 16-year-old, where the legal age shows that cognitively that they are at an age where they can make a decision, because they didn't base the age randomly. They probably done it based on their cognitive abilities.
I think just basically, I haven't done much research into this, but I know because I study law.
Yeah.
I know that.
I need a lawyer sometimes.
There's a line, and it's difficult to draw. So
morally, so even your moral compass is conditioned.
What do you mean by that?
Morality, like for example, morality is either objective or subjective. So for example, if it's subjective, that means the moral arguments that you're coming with cannot be substantiated because it's coming from a condition, the society you live in. If you lived in India and grew up in India, you will have different moral laws in place that you would find abnormal compared to the West. So we are conditioned. That's the reason why when you ask this question, which is a valid question, and you're asking because you want to know, So I really respect that, That the reason you're asking this is because there's a few conditioning happening. Number one, morally, there's a subjective morality. Okay, so subjectively you're coming and you've been conditioned morally. Number two, when we talk about a 54-year-old, I don't blame you, because the first thing you're thinking is 54-year-old, and you have this image in your head, and a 9-year-old, you have an image in your head. What we say is that is, I think it's the fallacy of presentism, which is we look at the people before us and go, oh my gosh, you guys were barbarians. They can look at us and say, you guys are animals. So what I'm saying is the following, just to answer your question. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, we look at his character. He was known to be a truthful person, so much so that his enemies who hated him would entrust him with their own wealth. Because we need to build a character here. We're looking at who we're dealing with. At the age of 25, he marries a 40-year-old woman, stays married to her for about 15 or 25 years. Does that sound like a womanizer to me? No, it doesn't. So he has other wives which are 70 years old, older women, Back in those days, he would marry for a variety of different reasons. These days, a person who has a perverted mind thinks everybody thinks like him. So when he looks at the Prophet, he thinks, oh my gosh, he must have been like that. His marriage to Aisha, radiallahu anha, Aisha was engaged to somebody else before him, which shows the norms of that society. So the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he didn't do anything abnormal then, and what we can learn from that is the Prophet never said, you have to go and marry a 6-year-old and consummate it at 9. We learn from that I have to, if my son wants to marry a 14-year-old girl, I will tell him we apply the same prophetic tradition. We wait for the girl to become an adult. Now, adult, in Islam, we believe we can't cause harm and receive harm. So that means if a girl, UK law says 16. How do you know a 16-year-old, she's not sexually ready? But the law says it's legal. So if it's a birthday tomorrow, today but legal tomorrow. What's changed? The point I'm trying to say, in a nutshell, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, we learned that for all times. So I apply the same thing today. Do you get it? The 6'9" thing is a matter of child to adulthood. And he did exactly that. So we look and say, you know what, a teenager, until she becomes 16 or 18, we apply the same prophetic thing.
The only difficulty, I understand what you're saying, the only difficulty is, I just never think a 9-year-old would be considered an adult under any circumstances.
In any circumstances? Can you tell me how?
I just don't think they're cognitively at that point of maturity.
Okay, have you ever asked your when they got married?
Yeah, mom and dad got married. They're like 27.
27. What about their...
They got married, I think 18 or something like that.
18?
Yeah.
If you ask their parents, I promise you, looking at marriage...
Yeah, they would have been younger.
No,
I respect, and I know that. And I think that's wrong as well.
No, it's not wrong.
Do you know what I mean?
What I'm saying is that back in those days, a 9-10-year-old who plays on the PlayStation was a warrior.
No, but
this is the world they lived in, bro.
Didn't have that
No.
ability.
No. How do we measure the cognitive ability? Like, how do we measure that? Can we measure it? 1400 years ago?
A certain amount of years to grow mentally and the brain to fully mature.
No, of course. But what I'm trying to say is that we're talking about 1400 years ago. Let's get that number. That's 1,400 years. Yeah.
Human beings were the same then.
No, there was. No, there was. No. Of course. Come on, bro. 1400.
Culturally,
14.
But I'm saying physically.
1400 years ago.
They look like us.
Bro, you know, in today's,
like
I do some charity work here and there. Yeah. There are youngsters who earn a living and provide for their mom and dad at the age of 10. They're out there working, yeah?
No, of course, but I don't think they've got the capacity to enter into a relationship.
No. But what I'm trying to say is, I understand. But what I'm saying is that we are talking about the 21st century. In the 21st century, in certain third world countries, there are young boys who, let me tell you something, I don't know if you have this saying yet, they would basically whip you around their finger. Yeah, they know the roads, they know how to earn a living better than me and you. So what we're saying is we can't apply this and look at children today and apply that there, because it's not fair. Because then what it goes down to is like me coming and saying your great grandparents, forgive me, were pedophiles. I have no right to say that, because they won't. They were genuine, honest people who married that young because that was the norms of that society.